Elara moved through the king's chambers with a practiced grace, her slender form a blur of motion against the rich tapestries. The scent of beeswax and ancient wood filled the air, a familiar comfort in the vastness of the royal palace of Lyra. Her fingers, nimble and precise, polished the ornate silver frame of a portrait, the king's stern visage reflecting back at her. She felt the cool metal beneath her touch, the intricate carvings of howling wolves catching on the soft cloth. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the gilded air. She heard the distant clang of a blacksmith, a sound that carried even through the thick stone walls, a constant hum of palace life. A small tremor ran through her as a patch of sunlight touched the floor beside her. There, where a shadow should have stretched long and dark, was nothing, only a subtle shimmering, like heat rising from warm stone, distorted the air where her form met the light. This absence was her secret, her curse, a constant whisper that followed her through the palace halls. She kept her gaze down, her movements steady, but an ache settled deep in her chest. She yearned for the simple comfort of a shadow, a natural extension of self that everyone else possessed. The lack of it made her feel incomplete, a ghost in her own skin, even as she felt the solid floor beneath her worn shoes. A pair of laundry maids bustled past the open doorway, their voices dropping to hushed tones as they caught sight of Alara. "Look," one whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. "She still has no shadow." The other maid shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "They say she's soulless, a hollow vessel walking among us." Alara felt the words like a physical blow, a cold knife twisting in her gut. She focused harder on the silver, her emerald eyes fixed on the king's painted face, willing herself not to react, not to show the pain that flared within her. She had heard these whispers her entire life within these walls, ever since she was a small child brought here to serve. She thought of the countless hours spent in the sunny courtyards, watching other children chase their shadows, laughing as they tried to catch them. For Alara, the ground remained stubbornly empty beneath her feet. It was a void that mirrored the emptiness she sometimes felt inside, a fear that perhaps the whispers held a grain of truth. Yet she knew she felt things deeply: the sting of injustice, the warmth of a kind word, the quiet beauty of a sunrise over the palace battlements. These feelings were real, vivid, undeniable, even if her own form refused to cast its proper darkened image. She traced the carved ear of the silver wolf on the frame, feeling the smooth, cold metal. Its eyes, though painted, seemed to hold an ancient wisdom, a silent understanding. Her black hair, usually unbound, was today pulled back tightly, a few strands escaping to tickle her cheek. She ignored them, her entire being centered on the task at hand. The king's chambers needed to be perfect, flawless. This was her duty, her purpose here, and she performed it with a quiet reverence. She moved to the king's writing desk, a massive slab of dark oak smelling faintly of ink and leather. Arranging parchment, sharpening quills. Her movements were fluid, almost soundless. She imagined the king, King Alaric, seated here, his brow furrowed in thought, the weight of his kingdom resting on his broad shoulders. She felt a strange kinship with his burdens, though hers were of a different, more personal, and far less grand nature. She ran her hand over the velvet of a chair, feeling its plush softness, a stark contrast to the coarse fabric of her own maid's uniform. She glanced at the heavy royal banners draped from the high ceilings, emblazoned with the rampant wolf crest of Lyra. They seemed to watch over her, silent judges in the echoing space. The quiet rhythm of her work was a balm, a way to anchor herself against the constant insecurity of her existence. She knew her days were always precarious, balanced on the thin edge of suspicion. Her heart, she realized, often felt like a frightened bird trapped in a cage fluttering against the bars of fear. Every sound, every sudden movement made her flinch, expecting the inevitable. She smoothed the bed linens, the embroidered silks cool beneath her fingertips. The vastness of the king's bed seemed to swallow the light, a dark, imposing presence in the corner of the room. She wondered if he found peace here, if the burdens of his crown ever truly lifted. She often saw him, a tall, imposing figure, moving through the palace, his gray eyes piercing, his authority absolute. But sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, she caught a glimpse of something else, a deep weariness, a profound sadness that seemed to settle in the lines around his eyes. She felt a strange, inexplicable ache of empathy for him then, a recognition of a hidden struggle beneath the powerful exterior. She finished her tasks, the room now gleaming, pristine. She took a deep, quiet breath, letting the clean air fill her lungs, before turning to leave, the hushed whispers of her shadowless existence trailing behind her. King Alaric sat on his throne, a formidable presence even in the Grand Council chamber. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and the murmur of hushed voices. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, framed a face etched with the burdens of leadership. His piercing gray eyes scanned the faces of his advisors, each one a testament to their long years of service. He listened to the droning reports of border skirmishes and failing harvests, the words washing over him like a tide. He heard the rustle of their robes as they shifted, the soft thud of a dropped quill, the nervous clearing of a throat. Outwardly, he was the Alpha King, unyielding, decisive. His voice, when it cut through the drone, was deep and authoritative, silencing all dissent. "We will send a detachment to the northern marches," he commanded, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Reinforce the watchtowers immediately." His hand rested briefly on the royal wolf amulet at his chest, a heavy silver pendant intricately carved with a howling wolf. The amulet, once a vibrant, glowing beacon of his power, now felt cold and dim against his skin. Its faded luster mirrored the growing emptiness within him, a void where his wolf spirit, Fenris, once resided. He felt the heavy weight of the crown, not just on his head, but on his very soul. The constant pressure, the endless demands, gnawed at him. He was a king without his true strength, a leader without his primal instinct. The loss of Fenris had been a slow, insidious theft, leaving him with a hollow ache that no amount of power or authority could fill. He still moved with the power of an alpha, but it felt like an echo, a memory of what once was. He heard the careful, measured words of his advisors, detailing their strategies, but his mind drifted, a constant, underlying current of unease flowing beneath the surface. He remembered the last time he truly felt Fenris's presence, a wild, exhilarating surge of power that had coursed through his veins during a hunt. Now only a phantom limb ache remained, a ghost of a sensation. He longed for the instinctual roar, the deep sense of connection to the land and his people that Fenris had provided. He sometimes felt as though he were merely performing the role of king, an actor playing a part, rather than truly embodying the spirit of his ancestors. He pressed his lips into a thin line, forcing himself back to the present, to the urgent matters of his kingdom. A sudden chill permeated the chamber, a subtle shift in the air that only he seemed to notice. He gripped the arms of his throne, his knuckles white. It was a familiar cold, a reminder of the creeping despair that had become his constant companion. He glanced at the vast, stained glass windows depicting ancient wolf legends, their colors muted by the gray afternoon light. They once inspired him, filled him with pride. Now they felt like a cruel mockery of his lost self. He cleared his throat, the sound a little rougher than he intended. "What news from the southern trade routes?" he asked, his voice betraying none of the turmoil raging within him. He watched the court official, a portly man named Thomas, nervously adjust his spectacles. The official's report was tedious, filled with numbers and tariffs, yet Alaric forced himself to concentrate. He could not afford to show weakness, not now when so many sought to exploit it. He knew the whispers of his waning power were starting to circulate, like a disease. His gaze hardened, a silent warning to anyone who dared to challenge his authority. He shifted slightly, the heavy velvet of his cloak rustling around him. He felt the dull ache in his bones, a weariness that sleep no longer seemed to cure. This was the bound of his inner battle, the constant struggle to appear whole when a fundamental part of him was missing. He remembered the feeling of Fenris's immense power, the raw, untamed spirit that had once pulsed within him, granting him unparalleled strength and insight. Now he relied solely on his intellect, on learned strategy, on the weight of his title. It felt like fighting with one arm tied behind his back. The meeting continued, a relentless parade of problems and pleas. He nodded, gave orders, projected an image of unwavering control, all while a silent scream echoed in the empty spaces of his soul. From a shadowed alcove in the grand hall, Lady Seraphina watched Alara. The maid was on her knees, scrubbing a stubborn stain from the intricate mosaic floor. Seraphina's sharp blue eyes, usually alight with calculated charm, were cold and discerning. She saw the maid's silent efficiency, the way her raven hair cascaded over her shoulders, the striking emerald of her eyes when she briefly looked up. But most importantly, Seraphina noted the absence. Where Alara knelt, a curious shimmering distortion hovered, a void that should have been a dark, distinct shadow. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of pine, Alara's signature, drifted across the hall. Seraphina's lips curled into a faint, predatory smile. The shadowless girl was a persistent nuisance, a whispered oddity that refused to fade into the background. She was a stain on the palace's pristine reputation, a constant reminder of things that were unnatural. Seraphina, draped in rich fabrics of deep sapphire that rustled with her slightest movement, exuded an aura of refined ambition. She believed she was destined for the throne beside King Alaric, and any obstacle, however small, would be swiftly removed. She felt the cool, polished stone beneath her expensive slippers, a stark contrast to the rough texture of Alara's work clothes. She had heard the hushed conversations, the fearful speculation about the maid's alleged soullessness. It was the perfect leverage. King Alaric, weakened and distracted by his own internal struggles, was vulnerable. He needed a strong, influential queen to stabilize the kingdom, a queen like her. This shadowless girl, a mere servant, was an affront to the natural order, an easy scapegoat to rally fear and consolidate her own position. Seraphina felt a thrill of anticipation, a cold, calculating excitement at the prospect of weaving her intricate web. She ran a gloved hand over the gold embroidery on her sleeve, the threads catching the light. She moved with deliberate grace toward Thomas, the court official from the council meeting, who was now engaged in conversation near a towering statue of an ancient Alpha King. His face was still flushed from the long session. Seraphina's approach was subtle, her voice like silken whispers designed to draw attention without seeming overtly aggressive. "Master Thomas," she purred, her tone dripping with feigned concern. Thomas startled, turning quickly, bowing low. "My Lady Seraphina," he stammered, his eyes wide. "I was merely observing the general conduct of the palace staff," she continued, her gaze briefly flicking towards Alara, who was now carefully wiping down a stone pillar. "And I could not help but notice some rather unsettling anomalies." She paused, allowing her words to hang in the air, weighted with unspoken meaning. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his gaze following hers to Alara. He, like most in the palace, knew the rumors. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach. The air suddenly felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. "The maid, Alara," Seraphina clarified, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "The one who attends to the king's private chambers. Her peculiarity. It has become quite the topic of hushed conversation. Would you not agree?" She smiled, a dazzling, yet utterly cold, expression. Thomas swallowed hard. "My lady, she is simply a servant. Perhaps a bit unusual but harmless, surely." He knew the consequences of displeasing Lady Seraphina. He felt the weight of her piercing stare, a pressure that seemed to squeeze the air from his lungs. "Harmless?" Seraphina's tone sharpened just perceptibly, a hint of steel beneath the velvet. "Or merely overlooked? Superstitions exist for a reason, Master Thomas. And when a creature walks among us without a soul, without even a proper shadow, what then is its true nature?" She lowered her voice further, leaning in conspiratorially. "Dark magic, perhaps? Or a vessel for something far more sinister? Such things could undermine the very foundations of the king's authority, especially in these sensitive times." She emphasized the last two words, subtly referencing Alaric's perceived weakness. Thomas felt a prickle of sweat on his brow. He understood the unspoken threat, the implication that his failure to act could be seen as disloyalty. He heard the rustle of her rich gown, the faint clinking of her jewels. He nodded slowly, a dawning realization spreading across his face. I understand, my lady." These are grave concerns indeed. I shall look into the matter with the utmost discretion." Seraphina's smile widened, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "Excellent, Master Thomas. The king's well-being, and indeed the stability of the kingdom, depend upon such vigilance." She patted his arm lightly, a gesture that felt more like a warning than an endearment, then swept away, leaving Thomas to contemplate the weighty implications of her words, the taste of fear already bitter in his mouth. He looked at Alara, now standing straight, her work finished, and saw not a maid but a problem, a danger to be neutralized. The air in the palace kitchens hummed with the usual cacophony of clanking pots and sizzling pans. The rich smell of roasting meat mingled with the sweet scent of baking bread. Alara, her hands busy peeling vegetables, felt a rare moment of peace amidst the organized chaos. The warmth of the ovens, the familiar rhythm of the work, offered a brief respite from the constant fear of judgment. She felt the smooth, cold skin of a potato beneath her fingers, the steady scrape of the peeler a comforting sound. A burst of hearty laughter erupted from the scullery maids, a sound that brought a small, wistful smile to Alara's lips. She felt the warmth of the wood-fired stove against her back. Suddenly, the kitchen doors burst open with a resounding crash, silencing the entire room. All noise ceased abruptly, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. 4 royal guards, their armor gleaming dully in the dim light, stood framed in the doorway. Their faces were grim, their stances rigid. The head guard, a hulking man with a scarred cheek, stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the stone floor. Alara's heart seized in her chest. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine, a premonition of disaster. The knife she held, forgotten, clattered to the wooden cutting board. The guard's gaze swept across the terrified faces of the kitchen staff, finally landing on Alara. His eyes narrowed, reflecting no sympathy, only grim determination. "Alara the maid," he boomed, his voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. "You are accused of dark magic and soullessness." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, her hands trembling uncontrollably. The accusations, whispered behind her back for so long, were now shouted in the open, undeniable. She felt a sudden wave of dizziness, the familiar kitchen walls seeming to spin around her. "By decree of the court," the guard continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "you are to be taken into custody immediately." The other cooks and maids recoiled, their faces pale with fear. No one dared to meet Alara's gaze, their eyes fixed on the guards, on the floor, anywhere but on her. She was a pariah, now officially condemned. She felt the stares like physical blows, each one a confirmation of her otherness, her unnatural state. The smell of fear, sharp and metallic, seemed to fill the room, overpowering the aromas of food. Before Alara could even process the words, before she could find her voice to protest, 2 guards advanced. Their movements were swift, practiced. One seized her arm, his grip cold and unyielding, digging into her flesh. She winced, a small gasp escaping her lips. The other guard grabbed her other arm, pulling her roughly forward. The sudden force sent a jolt of pain through her shoulders. She tasted the bitter tang of fear in her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind raced, a jumble of desperate, fragmented thoughts. Dark magic? Soullessness? It was all a monstrous lie, a cruel misunderstanding. She tried to pull away, a frantic, futile struggle against their superior strength. "No, wait," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper, hoarse with terror. "I haven't done anything." But her words were ignored, drowned out by the metallic clanking of the guard's armor as they dragged her towards the doorway. The other kitchen staff pressed themselves against the walls, their faces frozen in expressions of abject terror. No one offered help, no one dared to speak on her behalf. She was alone, utterly and terribly alone. She felt the rough hands on her arms, the unyielding force pulling her onward. The cold stone floor seemed to rush past her bare feet. She looked back at the kitchen, the familiar space now alien and menacing. The faces of her colleagues a blur of fear and avoidance. The light from the oven seemed to mock her, casting long shadows of everything but herself. Her own absent shadow felt like a gaping wound, visible to all, damning her without a word. She heard the guards' heavy breathing, the relentless rhythm of their footsteps. Panic tightened its icy grip around her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs. This was it then. The whispers had finally become accusations, and the accusations, a death sentence. The guards pulled her from the warmth and bustle of the kitchens into the echoing, cold passages of the palace. The sounds of daily life, muffled by the distance, seemed to mock her desperate situation. She stumbled, her legs threatening to give way beneath her, but the guards' iron grip never wavered. They propelled her forward, a prisoner in her own home, towards a fate she could not comprehend. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them that satisfaction. She would face whatever was coming with what little dignity she had left. The grand hall of the royal palace of Lyra erupted in a roar of gasps and murmurs as Alara was dragged into its cavernous space. The sheer size of the hall, with its soaring vaulted ceilings and immense stained glass windows, seemed to press down on her, stealing her breath. The light, usually filtered and soft, now felt harsh and blinding, illuminating every detail of her terror. Her arms ached from the guard's brutal hold, and her legs felt like lead, barely able to keep pace. She heard the collective intake of breath from the assembled courtiers, a wave of shock and morbid curiosity washing over her. King Alaric sat upon his throne at the far end of the hall, an unreadable expression on his face. His gaze, usually so piercing, seemed distant, almost detached. Beside him, Lady Seraphina was a vision of serene triumph, her eyes glittering with cold satisfaction. Ilara's eyes darted around the room, catching glimpses of familiar faces. The stern court officials, the curious noblewomen, the fearful palace staff. Each face held a different judgment, a different condemnation. She felt the chill of the stone floor beneath her worn shoes, the echoing silence that followed the initial uproar, broken only by her ragged breathing. "Bring the accused forward," a clear, resonant voice commanded from a raised platform to the king's right. It was Master Thomas, the court official, his voice now confident, almost zealous. The guards shoved Alara roughly, forcing her to stumble forward, closer to the imposing throne. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming silence. She felt a profound sense of humiliation, exposed and vulnerable before hundreds of accusing eyes. The air smelled of expensive perfumes and stale fear. "Alara, a maid of this palace," Thomas announced, his voice ringing through the hall, "stands accused of grave offenses." His words, amplified by the vast space, seemed to echo from every stone and every tapestry. Accused of wielding dark magic, of being a soulless vessel, a corruption within these hallowed walls. Each accusation was a physical blow, a hammer striking her very being. Ilara flinched, her head bowed slightly, but she refused to completely lower her gaze. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her utterly broken. The roar of whispers surged again, a tide of condemnation that threatened to drown her. She heard fragments. Soulless creature, witchcraft, an abomination. She tasted the metallic tang of fear in her mouth, her throat tight with unshed tears. Her fingers, still stained from the vegetables she had been peeling, curled into tight fists. She focused on the cold stone beneath her feet, willing herself to remain upright, to not collapse under the weight of their judgment. Her entire world, once a quiet, predictable routine of service, had shattered into 1,000 terrifying pieces. She lifted her eyes, meeting the gaze of King Alaric for a fleeting moment. His gray eyes held a flicker of something she could not decipher, a ghost of an emotion that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Then, her gaze fell upon Lady Seraphina, whose triumphant smirk sent a fresh wave of despair through her. Alara felt utterly helpless, a small, insignificant figure caught in a powerful, unforgiving current. Her fate, she realized with chilling clarity, now hung by a single fragile thread. The accusations of witchcraft and soullessness echoed through the grand hall, a terrifying symphony of her impending doom. The grand hall of Lyra Palace hummed with whispers. Alara stood before the throne, cold stone numbing her bare feet. Her slender form contrasted with King Alaric's majesty in the court's judging eyes. Fear filled the air, a heavy weight. Hundreds of noble gazes pricked her skin, scrutinizing each breath. Torchlight cast shadows, but at her feet, a subtle shimmer showed where her own should have been. Lady Seraphina stepped forward, golden hair styled. Her voice, usually soft, now cut through the assembly. She presented her case with ease, blue eyes gleaming with feigned conviction. Seraphina spoke of shadows as the soul's essence, a divine mark. She called Alara's shadowlessness a terrifying aberration, a sign of unnatural dark connection. Behold your majesty, the maid Alara. Seraphina's voice resonated. Each word struck Alara's dignity. Her presence defies natural order, an empty vessel. Seraphina gestured to trembling servants. They offered fabricated stories. Alara's strange habits, unsettling silence, her shadow's absence. A scullery boy mumbled about cold spots in her wake. This lie made Alara's stomach clench. An older laundress claimed Alara's touch made water unnaturally cold. The court gasped at each revelation, their fear palpable. Seraphina wove superstitions into undeniable guilt. She cited obscure texts, speaking of shadowless beings as harbingers of plague. Her words poisoned minds, painting Alara as a monstrous omen. Their collective fear pressed, threatening Alara's knees. She fixed her gaze above the king's head, refusing her accuser's eyes. Her clasped hands grew numb. She felt detached, watching a play where she was a condemned actress. A deep ache pulsed in her chest, a profound injustice settling. King Alaric watched from his throne, shoulders squared, gray eyes narrowed. He listened to Seraphina's accusations, expression unreadable. He felt a dull throb behind his eyes, the gnawing emptiness from his lost wolf, Fenris. Fear hung heavy, mixing with his own weary frustration. He saw Alara, small, fragile, yet still. He noticed the subtle shimmer around her, torchlight bending at her feet, an anomaly. A flicker crossed his face. Doubt, curiosity, unsettling recognition. He could not name the feeling, but it stirred a forgotten corner of his soul, dormant since Fenris vanished. A strange whisper echoed in his mind about a deep, cold silence when he looked at Alara. The court, swayed by Seraphina's venom and their fears, erupted. Voices rose, demanding swift justice. "Soulless witch!" a lord shouted. "Burn her at the stake!" a lady shrieked. Their fury crackled, washing over Alara. She felt the suffocating heat of their hatred. Her throat dry, she would not give them the satisfaction of a plea. She would not beg for a life they had already decided to take. A faint tremor ran through her. She focused on the wolf carvings on the pillars, seeking solace. She thought of her small room, the rough blanket, the oat gruel. These details felt like anchors in the rising storm. King Alaric's gaze remained on Alara, searching for wickedness. He saw only a young woman, pale, slight, her emerald eyes unwavering. He tried to discern truth, but his senses felt dulled, judgment clouded by the ache of his missing wolf. He could not summon the alpha's clear instinct. His hand went to the royal wolf amulet, its silver cold against his skin, mirroring his spirit's chill. The court clamored for execution. Incense mingled sickeningly with courtiers' sweat. Their fear turned into a bloodthirsty roar. "Let her face the dawn's fire," one cried. Alara felt a peculiar calm, a strange peace from utter despair. She had always known this day might come. She tasted the metallic hint of inevitability. Alara stood silent, gaze unwavering, the court's judgment a physical burden. Her muscles ached. Their words, accusations, bounced off a new wall within her. She was not soulless. She had harmed no one. Her only crime was existing without a shadow, inexplicable to her, terrifying to them. She focused on her heart's thump, a defiant drumbeat. Finally, a grizzled old judge, face etched with verdicts, raised a trembling hand. The clamor subsided into a tense hush. He cleared his throat, rasping. He spoke of ancient laws, the soul's sanctity, and perils of unnatural beings. Each word hammered Alara's coffin. Her breath caught, a cold knot forming. She braced for pronouncement, eyes fixed on the wall carvings, seeking ancient protection. "By the ancient laws of Lyra and this royal court's judgment," the judge boomed, "Alara, maid of the palace, stands accused and found guilty of crimes against nature and sacred order." A collective sigh rippled. Alara felt a chill deeper than the stone floor. Her fate was sealed. She had known, yet the words struck with force. Her punishment, the judge continued solemnly, shall be death. By dawn she shall face the pyre, her unnatural form purified by fire. A wave of relief washed over the court. Alara closed her eyes for a second, a single tear tracing a cold path, a tear for the life she had barely lived. Salt touched her lips, mingling with fear. She thought of morning light, the sun's warmth, and the cruel irony of her end. As the court began to stir, a deep voice cut through the clamor. Silence! King Alaric's command was a thunderclap. The hall fell into profound hush, all eyes on the king. His gray eyes, usually tormented, now held sharp intensity. He pushed forward, radiating unexpected authority. A strange energy pulsed through the king, a flicker stirring within him. He felt despair in Alara's stillness. An inexplicable, urgent instinct surged. Her death at dawn felt terribly wrong. He watched her last tear escape. An echo of Fenris's howl reverberated in his memory. The court has rendered its verdict, King Alaric stated, his voice deliberate, commanding, and I acknowledge its wisdom, grounded in our most ancient traditions. A murmur of approval rippled. Seraphina's lips curved into a triumphant smile, her gaze meeting Alara's with cold satisfaction. Alara's eyes were on the king, a flicker of bewildered hope, quickly lost to grim acceptance. She wondered what purpose delaying her death would serve. However, King Alaric continued, his voice stronger, resolve hardening, the final judgment upon a life, especially one tied to profound mystery, remains with the Alpha King. He paused, letting words settle. Pine and old stone filled the vacuum. Seraphina's smile faltered, her blue eyes narrowing. Alara is pronounced guilty and her sentence is death, the king reiterated. But her execution will not take place at dawn. A collective gasp swept the hall. The judge, pale, opened his mouth, then closed it. Alara's breath hitched, a faint spark of bewilderment. This was not reprieve, but an agonizing extension of doom. King Alaric's gaze swept the court, then settled on Alara with piercing intensity. She shall remain imprisoned, her life held in abeyance. I decree a final public judgment shall be held at my leisure when I deem the time and circumstances fitting. The words hung, a command with no dissent or explanation. Courtiers exchanged confused glances, their relief replaced by gnawing uncertainty. The Alpha King had spoken. Alara's grim fate remained suspended, terrifyingly balanced. The king's word had cut through the clamor like a sharpened blade, silencing the court in an instant. Alaric had not dismissed Alara's guilt outright, but the sudden halt to her immediate execution hung heavy in the air, a disruption to the expected order. His voice, usually a steady rumble of authority, had held an edge that permitted no argument, demanding a final public judgment at his leisure. This decree left the assembled nobles bewildered, their whispers turning into hushed murmurs that followed Alara as she was led away. Alaric watched her go, a slender figure in the grip of two guards, her face unreadable, even to his keen alpha eyes. The stone beneath his boots felt cold, mirroring a chill that had settled deep within his own chest. He had seen the relief in her emerald eyes when he intervened, a fleeting spark quickly doused by the grim reality of her situation. He felt a strange pang, an echo of a feeling he could not name, as the dungeon doors closed behind her. Lady Seraphina's smile, usually a polished mask of charm, had tightened at the corners, a flicker of something venomous in her blue eyes. She had expected Alara to be dispatched with swift certainty, a convenient nuisance removed. Alaric felt her gaze on his back, a silent question he was not ready to answer. He knew the court would dissect his decision for days, turning his mercy into a sign of weakness, a crack in the foundation of his rule. Yet he could not bring himself to regret it. The hours that followed were a blur of formal duties, each pronouncement and decree feeling hollow. Alaric sat on his throne, the weight of his crown pressing down, not just on his head, but on his very soul. The gilded hall, usually a source of pride, now felt like a cage. His thoughts kept straying to the maid, locked away in the darkest cells beneath the palace. He felt a strange, persistent unease, a knot in his stomach that refused to loosen. It was not pity that gnawed at him, he told himself, not entirely. He had ordered executions before, just and unjust, without this persistent thrum of discomfort. This was different, an inexplicable pull towards the girl, a feeling that defied logic and mocked the court's unanimous verdict. Her shadowlessness, once a clear sign of soullessness and dark magic as the ancient text proclaimed, now seemed less like an accusation and more like a riddle. He found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. Alaric dismissed his counsel early, the drone of their reports grating on his frayed nerves. He retreated to his private chambers, the heavy oak door thudding shut behind him, plunging the room into a temporary silence that was quickly filled by the frantic rhythm of his own heart. He walked to the window, gazing out at the setting sun, casting long, dark shadows across the palace grounds. Every tree, every stone, every guard casting its own distinct shape upon the earth. The absence of one such shadow, Alara's, became an obsession in his mind. He remembered the way her eyes had met his, unwavering, even as the court howled for her blood. There had been no fear, no cunning, just a quiet defiance that had stirred something deep within him. It was a familiar feeling, one that had been absent for years, a whisper of the primal strength that used to define him. It was the echo of Fenris, his lost wolf, the very essence of his alpha power, which had vanished without a trace 5 years prior. Fragmented, unsettling memories of Fenris began to surface, unbidden, like ghosts from a forgotten past. He saw Fenris in his prime, a magnificent silver-gray creature, eyes like molten gold, standing beside him, a pillar of strength and loyalty. He could almost feel the rough fur beneath his fingers, smell the scent of pine and wild earth that always clung to his wolf. He heard a distant, mournful howl, not from the outside world, but from the depths of his own mind, a sound that brought a gnawing sense of emptiness. The loss of Fenris had been a slow, insidious drain. First, the vibrancy had faded from the world. Then his senses, once sharp as an eagle's, had dulled. His instincts, once unerring, had become clouded. The royal wolf amulet, which had once pulsed with a warm, steady glow, had grown cold and dim, a constant reminder of his diminishing power. He had sought answers from every sage, every healer, every ancient scroll in the kingdom. But Fenris remained lost, and Alaric remained incomplete. He ran a hand through his dark hair, streaked with silver now, a testament to the years of silent struggle. Could Alara's shadowlessness truly be a sign of dark magic, or was it something else, something connected to his own profound loss? The court's verdict, rooted in fear and ancient superstitions, felt too simple, too easy. He refused to believe it without probing deeper, without seeking answers beyond mere pronouncements of guilt. Alaric needed someone he could trust implicitly, someone who valued truth above all else. He thought of Sir Gareth, his most loyal guard, a man whose quiet integrity was as sharp as his sword. Gareth would not be swayed by court gossip or popular opinion. He would seek facts, not theories. Later that evening, under the cloak of deepest night, Alaric summoned Sir Gareth to his private study. The room was lit only by a single flickering candle, casting dancing shadows that swallowed the corners. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and the king's unspoken anxieties. "Gareth," Alaric began, his voice low, a gravelly whisper that barely disturbed the quiet. "I have a task for you, one that must remain strictly between us." Sir Gareth, a man of strong build and an unshakable demeanor, merely nodded, his gaze steady, awaiting his king's command. He knew the weight of such secrecy. "The girl, Alara," Alaric continued, his fingers tracing an unseen pattern on his polished desk. "The court condemned her, but I feel a disquiet, a question that lingers." He paused, searching for the right words, words that would not betray the strangeness of his own thoughts. "Her shadowlessness, the accusations of soullessness. It feels incomplete." Gareth remained silent, his expression carefully neutral, absorbing his king's unusual directive. "I want you to investigate her origins," Alaric commanded, his voice gaining a firmer edge. "Quietly, discreetly. Find out everything you can about her past, her family, where she came from. Go to the villages, speak to the people, but leave no trail that leads back to me." "Your Majesty," Gareth finally spoke, his voice a low rumble, "do you suspect a conspiracy or something else?" Alaric met his guard's gaze, a flash of torment in his own gray eyes. "I do not know, Gareth, But I have a gnawing feeling, a sense that there is more to this than mere superstition. Look for anything that could explain her condition, anything that might contradict the court's judgment. Seek the truth, whatever it may be. Do not be swayed by fear or ancient tales, just the truth. Gareth bowed, his movements precise and efficient. It will be done, my king. With another silent nod, he melted back into the shadows from which he had come, leaving Alaric alone once more. The king stood by the window again, the moon now high in the sky, a silver disk illuminating the world in stark relief. He felt a sliver of hope, a fragile seed planted in the fertile ground of his despair. Perhaps Gareth would find something, some logical explanation that would quiet the insistent whispers in his mind. But even as he hoped, another part of him knew this was no ordinary mystery. This felt ancient, primal, tied to the very core of his being. He thought of Alara in the dungeon, cold and alone, perhaps dreaming of a world she would never see again. The image of her unwavering eyes returned, and with it, a peculiar sensation. It was a cold touch on his skin, a shiver that ran down his spine, not of fear, but of recognition. It was a strange echo, a fleeting sense of something vast and powerful, yet deeply vulnerable. He felt a yearning, a deep, resonant ache that had not been so prominent since the day Fenris disappeared. Alaric paced his chambers, unable to find rest. The palace, usually a bastion of strength, now felt like a tomb, stifling and oppressive. He could almost hear the distant, pained whimpers of his lost wolf, a phantom sound that only he could perceive. The emptiness within him was a constant companion, a void that no amount of power or authority could fill. He missed the raw, untamed spirit of Fenris, the other half of his soul that had been ripped away. He missed the way Fenris had grounded him, connected him to the very earth, to the ancient ways of their kind. He remembered the legends of shadowless beings, tales of spirits trapped between worlds, or creatures cursed for dark deeds. But Alara did not feel cursed. She felt different. Unsettling, yes, but not evil. Her quiet strength had been palpable, even in the face of death. What if her shadowlessness was not a curse, but a consequence of something else? Something profound and as yet unknown? What if it was connected to his loss? The thought was audacious, almost sacrilegious. How could a simple maid be connected to the fate of the Alpha King's wolf? Yet the idea took root, stubbornly refusing to be dismissed. The inexplicable pull he felt towards her, the strange unease, the resurfacing of long dormant memories of Fenris, it all converged on Alara. He went to his private vault, a hidden recess behind a tapestry, and retrieved the royal wolf amulet. It lay heavy in his palm, a circle of dull, tarnished silver. The intricately carved wolf, once vibrant and alive, now seemed lifeless, its howling maw silent, its eyes devoid of light. He clenched his fist around it, the cold metal digging into his skin. He wished for the warmth, the faint glow that had once signified his connection to Fenris, to his power, to his very identity as Alpha. As he gazed at his dimmed royal wolf amulet, a sudden vivid mental image flashed before his eyes, impossibly clear, impossibly real. He saw a spectral wolf, shimmering faintly, its ghostly form unmistakable, standing not in some ancient forest or forgotten memory, but at Alara's feet. The stone floor was a relentless cold beneath Alara's bare feet, pulling what little warmth remained from her body. Darkness pressed in from every wall, thick and absolute, broken only by the persistent, rhythmic drip of water somewhere far off in the black. Each drop echoed through the oppressive silence, marking the slow, agonizing passage of time. She sat huddled, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her back against the rough, unforgiving stone, trying to make herself as small as possible. The stench of mildew and despair clung to the air, a physical weight she could almost taste. Her mind, however, refused to be confined. It raced through the searing images of the trial, the accusatory glares, Lady Seraphina's venomous words, and the roar of the crowd demanding her death. She remembered the king's piercing gray eyes, unreadable and distant, yet they had stayed her execution, a reprieve she did not understand. Why had he done it? Was it a cruel game, prolonging her agony? Or was there some sliver of doubt behind that stern facade? The question gnawed at her, a burning ember in the icy darkness of her cell. A peculiar chill, deeper than the dungeon's pervasive cold, began to seep into her bones, raising goosebumps along her arms. It was not merely physical, it carried a strange electric hum, a sensation that prickled at the edges of her awareness. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the intrusive feeling, but it intensified, drawing her inward. Suddenly, the stale air of the dungeon dissolved, replaced by the crisp, cool breath of an ancient forest. Pine needles cushioned her phantom feet, a faint, earthy scent rising around her. Towering trees, impossibly old, stretched their gnarled branches towards a sky she could not quite see, their leaves rustling with secrets. A sound then, distinct and raw, tore through the ethereal silence. It was the howl of a wolf, long and mournful, rich with a primal sorrow that resonated deep within her own chest. The sound was not from the dungeon. It echoed in the chamber of her soul, shaking her to her very core. She felt a profound, overwhelming sense of loss, an ache that was not her own, yet it settled into her heart with startling familiarity. It was as if a part of her had always been missing, and this haunting cry was its lament. Tears welled, hot and unexpected, tracing paths down her cold cheeks. She did not know why she wept, only that the grief was immense, unbearable, and somehow deeply personal. The vision flickered, blurring at the edges, but the raw emotion remained. A phantom limb of sorrow. A strange, cold presence brushed against her. Not a physical touch, but an insistent, ethereal caress against her spirit. It felt like an invisible breath, a whisper of frosted air on her skin, yet it sent shivers, not of fear, but of an inexplicable recognition, a peculiar comfort she could not comprehend. It was a sensation of being seen, understood, in a way she had never experienced before. Alara's breath hitched. She instinctively reached out a trembling hand into the darkness, not knowing what she sought, but compelled by an invisible force. Her fingers passed through empty air, yet she felt something, a vibrant, humming energy, an echo of immense, untamed power. It was like reaching into the heart of a storm and finding not chaos, but a fierce, protective warmth. The power both frightened and enthralled her, a wild, untamed thing that seemed to call to something equally wild and untamed within herself. Her hand tingled, then her whole arm, as if she had touched the very essence of life and death, intertwined. The visions returned, sharper now, more insistent. She saw flashes of a magnificent wolf, its fur shimmering silver gray, its eyes glowing with an ancient, knowing light. It moved with silent grace through the spectral forest, a creature of pure power and boundless freedom. But there was also an underlying current of pain, a deep melancholy that seemed to emanate from its very being. She felt its isolation, its longing, its desperate search for something lost. The wolf's silent plea resonated with her own deep-seated loneliness, the burden of being shadowless, of being an outcast. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the cold stone of her prison with the vivid, living world unfurling behind her eyelids. Was she losing her sanity? Was this the dark magic the court had accused her of, finally consuming her from within? But there was no malevolence in the wolf's gaze, only a profound sadness, a yearning that mirrored her own. Her shadowlessness, the very thing that condemned her, suddenly felt less like a curse and more like a conduit, a strange, empty space waiting to be filled. The presence around her intensified, swirling like an unseen wind. It pressed closer, a silent, powerful demand. She could feel the wolf's spirit, not just a vision, but a palpable entity breathing beside her, its spectral form overlapping with her own. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken communication, a language of pure emotion. A memory, not hers but vividly clear, flashed in her mind. A strong hand, a loyal companion, a bond forged in loyalty and shared purpose. Then, a sharp, searing pain, a tearing in an endless, suffocating emptiness. This was the king's pain, the wolf's agony, and somehow it was becoming hers too. She opened her eyes, startled by the intensity of the shared sensation, and found the dungeon cell impossibly bright. A faint, shimmering outline had appeared on the damp stone floor directly in front of her. It was the distinct print of a magnificent wolf's paw, large and regal, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The luminescence pulsed gently, casting dancing, ghostly shadows around the small impression. Alara stared, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, completely mesmerized. The light was beautiful, impossible, and utterly real. For a brief, breathtaking moment, the paw print held its luminous form, a silent, undeniable testament to the unseen presence. Then, as quickly and mysteriously as it had appeared, the ethereal glow flickered, dimmed, and faded completely, leaving the cold, unforgiving darkness once more. A chilling fury pulsed through Lady Seraphina, hot and sharp beneath her silken gowns. King Alaric's inexplicable delay, his refusal to let the maid Alara die, gnawed at her like a starved wolf. Every moment Alara breathed, Seraphina's own power felt less secure, her path to the throne less certain. The palace walls, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to press in, echoing with whispers she could almost hear, whispers of the king's weakening resolve, his strange fascination. She paced her private chambers, the rich fabrics of her dress rustling with agitated elegance, her sharp blue eyes scanning tapestries that once seemed to confirm her destiny. The air in the palace itself felt charged with unease. Courtiers moved with a tentative grace, their smiles fixed, their eyes darting, searching for signs of the king's favor or disfavor. Seraphina understood this dance better than anyone. She moved through the grand halls, her golden hair a beacon of calculated serenity, her voice a low, persuasive murmur. To one lord, she spoke of the king's recent, uncharacteristic moods, suggesting they stemmed from the burden of governance and a need for strong, decisive counsel. To a lady, she sighed dramatically about the weight of expectation upon the king, hinting at his declining judgment since the loss of his wolf, a weakness only a queen by his side could truly fortify. Her words, carefully chosen and placed, spread like tendrils of ivy, clinging to every corner of the court. The king's strength, she implied, was ebbing, his decisions clouded by some unseen malady. Was it wise, she mused aloud to a trusted general, to allow a mere serving girl to occupy the king's thoughts when the kingdom teetered on the brink? Her suggestions were never accusations, only concerns, soft as a feather, yet sharp as a blade. She watched the ripple effect of her poison with detached satisfaction, seeing the seeds of doubt take root in the fertile ground of courtly ambition. The common folk, too, felt the shift in the palace's atmosphere. The king's once unyielding presence had softened, his authority seemingly less absolute. Seraphina reveled in this instability, recognizing it as her opportunity. She craved not just the crown, but the absolute power that came with it, a power she felt Alaric was no longer fit to wield. She believed herself the rightful inheritor of this fading glory, meant to restore the kingdom's strength through her own cunning and ambition. Alara, the shadowless maid, was merely an inconvenient fly to be swatted away. Seraphina's gaze fell upon the dungeon guards, burly men with eyes dulled by routine and the grim nature of their duties. She observed them from a distance, noting their greed, their longing for a life beyond the cold, damp stone. She chose her target carefully. A burly guard named Thomas, whose broad shoulders slumped with resignation, whose gaze often lingered on the lavish meals delivered to the palace's upper echelons. His poverty was a gaping wound, easily exploited. She approached Thomas one evening, her voice a low, sympathetic hum that cut through the clanging of armor and the distant echoes of the dungeon. She spoke of the maid Alara, not as a threat, but as a source of endless trouble for the king, a distraction from his duties. Imagine, Seraphina purred, her fingers brushing lightly against a heavy gold coin, if this unfortunate matter were to simply resolve itself. The coin gleamed in the dim torchlight, its promise intoxicating. Thomas's eyes, usually so lifeless, flickered with a raw, hungry light. He swallowed hard, the scent of dust and damp stone filling his nostrils, the weight of the gold an invisible presence in the air. The king's patience wears thin, Thomas, she continued, her voice laced with a subtle urgency. This girl, she causes him great distress. A quick, quiet end, presented as an unfortunate accident of the dungeon, would be a service to us all, a service that would be generously rewarded. She spoke of a small pouch of gold, enough to ensure his family's comfort for years, enough to buy him a life away from the perpetual chill of the dungeon. Thomas envisioned a warm hearth, a full belly, the freedom from the constant gnawing cold. The temptation was a physical ache in his chest. His conscience, a small withered thing, whispered faintly, but Seraphina's words, sweet and venomous, drowned it out. No one need ever know, she assured him, her blue eyes fixed on his, demanding his compliance. It would be a kindness, truly, for the girl, for the king, for the stability of the realm. Thomas, caught in the web of her manipulation and his own desperation, nodded slowly, the unspoken agreement hanging heavy between them. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, but the image of the gold, the warmth it promised, burned brighter. Meanwhile, Seraphina maintained her public facade, a masterpiece of regal grace and impending triumph. She moved through the court as if she already wore the crown, her movements fluid and confident. She would often be seen at King Alaric's side during public appearances, her hand gently resting on his arm, her head tilted towards him in a gesture of intimate counsel. The king, distracted by his own inner torment and the lingering mystery of Alara, often seemed oblivious to her carefully orchestrated display. He appeared distant, his gaze often lost in some unseen space, his responses clipped and vague. Seraphina interpreted his detachment as a sign of his reliance on her, a tacit acceptance of her place. She made sure her voice carried, speaking of their shared future, of the stability her presence would bring to the kingdom. Her laughter, light and airy, echoed through the vast chambers, a sound that masked the steel beneath. She wanted every lord, every lady, every servant to witness their supposed closeness, to believe the marriage was all but sealed, her authority unquestioned. The image she projected was one of an inseparable pair, a king and his queen-to-be ruling in harmony. She wore gowns of the deepest azure and emerald, colors that subtly mimicked the king's own royal hues, weaving herself into the tapestry of his reign. She felt the eyes of the court upon her, eyes filled with speculation, envy, and grudging acceptance. This was her moment, she thought, her internal voice a triumphant roar. Alara was merely a temporary stain on her perfect canvas, soon to be erased. The weight of this charade, however, did not entirely escape Alaric. He felt a vague annoyance at Seraphina's constant presence, her possessive touches, her insistent chatter about future plans. His mind, however, was consumed by Alara, by the spectral image of the wolf's paw print, by the gnawing emptiness where his own spirit should have been. He barely registered Seraphina's carefully crafted performance, seeing only a blur of golden hair and rich fabric. Her touch felt cold and demanding, a stark contrast to the phantom warmth he had felt when thinking of Alara. Deep in the dungeon's crushing silence, Alara shivered, drawing her thin cloak tighter around her. The air tasted of damp earth and unseen decay, a bitter reminder of her confinement. The faint, shimmering outline of a wolf's paw print, which had briefly appeared and then faded, still pulsed in her memory, a vivid counterpoint to the relentless gloom. She had felt a strange warmth emanate from it, a feeling of deep, ancient connection that defied the cold reality of her cell. Her thoughts drifted, her mind creating stories to fill the void. Images of vast, untamed forests, the scent of pine and wet leaves, the powerful, silent presence of a great wolf. She felt a profound loneliness, a longing that echoed in the very marrow of her bones, as if a part of her soul cried out for something lost, something she could not name. Her body ached from the cold, her stomach growled with hunger, but her spirit, sustained by these strange visions, refused to break. She sat curled on a bed of straw, her emerald eyes, usually so bright, now shadowed with weariness, but still holding a flicker of resilience. A sudden clang of metal startled her, tearing her from her reverie. The heavy wooden door to her cell groaned open, revealing the hulking figure of Thomas, the guard. His face was a mask of forced neutrality, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Fear, perhaps, or a desperate resolve. He carried a small, chipped ceramic cup, steam rising faintly from its rim, and a small, tightly stoppered vial clutched in his other hand. The metallic tang of fear, both his and her own, filled the confined space. "The Lady Seraphina sends her regards," Thomas said, his voice unusually strained, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. He held out the cup. A calming tea, she said, to ease your worries. Alara's brow furrowed. Seraphina's regards? The very idea was absurd. The scent that wafted from the cup was sweet, almost cloying, designed to mask something else. Her instincts, sharpened by a lifetime of navigating the treacherous currents of the palace, screamed a warning. A peculiar chill ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from an unseen threat. She looked at the guard, truly looked at him. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly, his gaze skittering away from hers, unable to meet her direct, unwavering stare. He seemed to be fighting an internal battle, his face pale beneath the grime of the dungeon. His breathing was shallow, his broad chest rising and falling too quickly. Alara felt a deep unease settle over her, a cold dread that mirrored the chill in her bones. This was no act of kindness. "Thank you," Alara said, her voice soft, but she made no move to take the cup. Her fingers, usually nimble and quick, felt heavy, rooted to her side. She sensed a profound danger, a betrayal in the air that was almost palpable. The warmth from the phantom paw print earlier felt like a distant dream, replaced by an icy premonition. She wished for a shadow, just one, to perhaps hide her from this man's gaze, to absorb the terrible weight of this moment. Thomas took a step closer, the small vial clutched even tighter in his hand. He looked around the empty cell, his eyes wide, as if searching for unseen witnesses. He reached towards the cup with his free hand, as if to stir the contents, or perhaps to quickly empty the vial into it. The small stopper on the vial was almost invisible against his calloused thumb. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She could almost taste the bitter, chemical tang of the poison she knew lurked within. Just as Thomas's thumb slid the stopper free, poised to drop the contents into the steaming liquid, a sudden, inexplicable force ripped through the cell. It was not a wind nor a tremor, but an unseen energy that snapped through the air like a whip. The small vial in Thomas's hand, still uncorked, exploded. It did not merely fall, but shattered with a sharp, violent crack, fragments of glass flying outwards. The dark, viscous liquid within splashed harmlessly onto the cold stone floor, forming a small, sinister puddle that quickly began to seep into the cracks. Thomas cried out, a guttural sound of pure terror, stumbling backward, dropping the cup of tea with a clatter. His eyes were wide and disbelieving, fixed not on Alara, but on the invisible space between them, as if he had just witnessed a ghost. He stared at his trembling, empty hand, the sensation of the shattering glass still stinging his palm. The remnants of the vial, sharp and glittering, lay scattered on the ground, a testament to an impossible event. Alara remained untouched, her eyes fixed on the shocked guard, her breath held captive in her chest. King Alaric stood by the great arched window, his gaze fixed on the moonless night sky, but his eyes saw nothing. A tremor ran through his hand, not of cold, but of a deep, pervasive weariness that had become his constant companion. He felt a constant, unsettling hum beneath his skin, a vibration of power struggling to maintain its hold. His once formidable patience had worn thin, frayed by the relentless pressure of a kingdom in turmoil and a spirit in decay. An advisor, Lord Thomas, cleared his throat hesitantly from behind him. "Your Majesty, the delegation from the northern marches awaits your decree." Alaric turned, his movements slower than usual, a stiffness in his joints he usually never felt. He tried to summon his customary authoritative tone, but his voice emerged clipped, edged with an irritability he could barely control. "They will wait. My mind is occupied with matters of greater import." Lord Thomas bowed quickly, retreating with an unnerving haste that spoke volumes. Alaric watched him go, a fresh wave of self-loathing washing over him. He was losing control, not just of his court, but of himself. A dull ache throbbed behind his eyes, a persistent reminder of the sleepless nights spent poring over dusty tomes. His once sharp senses felt blunted, the scent of pine from the forest less invigorating, the distant howls of wild wolves, once a comfort, now a torment. He felt a weakening in his very bones, a sluggishness that defied his will, and he despised this failing form. This was not the Alpha King he knew, the one who had commanded respect with a single glance. This man was a shadow of his former self, a king without his wolf. He reached for the royal wolf amulet, hanging heavy on his chest, its silver now dull, almost gray. He rubbed its surface with his thumb, hoping, foolishly, for a flicker of light, a hint of the ancient power it once pulsed with. Nothing. It felt cold against his skin, a lifeless weight, a constant mocking reminder of his immense loss. He remembered its former brilliance, the way it had glowed with a soft, inner fire when Fenris was strong within him, a beacon of his unyielding power. Now it was merely a piece of metal, beautiful perhaps, but empty. He dismissed his personal guard, a quiet command that carried an unspoken demand for solitude. The heavy oaken doors of his private study swung shut, plunging the room into a silence that felt oppressive. He moved to a hidden compartment behind a tapestry depicting the first Alpha King, a man of legend whose power had seemingly known no bounds. From within, he pulled out a stack of ancient scrolls, their parchment brittle, their bindings frayed with age. The scent of old paper and forgotten magic filled the air. He carefully unrolled one, its script faded, almost illegible in places. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock his desperate search. He traced the words with a trembling finger, searching for any mention of shadowless beings, of spirits severed from their hosts, of unique connections that transcended the natural order. His eyes scanned page after page, sometimes for hours, until the words blurred into meaningless symbols. He was a king, yet he felt like a thief, stealing knowledge that might condemn him further. But what choice did he truly have? The kingdom whispered of his weakening, of a king losing his grip. His thoughts drifted to Alara, the maid accused of soullessness, imprisoned in his dungeons. Logic screamed that she was a threat, a creature of ill omen, perhaps even a witch. Yet something deeper, something primal, whispered a different truth, a truth he was terrified to confront. He remembered her unwavering gaze in the court, her quiet dignity, even as the entire kingdom condemned her. He recalled the peculiar sensation in his chest when she had been brought before him, a faint resonance he couldn't explain. He had secretly dispatched his most trusted couriers, not to Sir Gareth this time, but to the reclusive scholars who dwelled on the fringes of the Whisperwood. These men and women were often regarded as eccentric, even dangerous, keepers of lore long forgotten by the civilized world. The reports they returned were cryptic, often frustratingly vague. They spoke of ancient bonds, of souls tethered beyond understanding, of shadows that were not merely absences of light, but manifestations of profound magical connections. One particularly wizened old woman had spoken of a rare phenomenon, a vessel chosen by fate, whose own shadow was consumed by a greater, lost spirit. Ilara's image kept resurfacing in his mind. He tried to dismiss it, to focus on the arcane texts, but the memory of her stillness, her strange calm during the trial persisted. He saw again the brief, shimmering outline of a wolf's paw print in her cell, an incident that had been reported to him by Sir Gareth with a mix of awe and fear. He remembered the guard's terrified account of the poisoned cup, shattering inexplicably in his hand. Each piece of information, each strange occurrence, seemed to weave itself around her, creating an undeniable, if utterly bewildering tapestry. He found himself thinking of her in the dungeon, wondering if she was cold, if she was afraid. This was a dangerous path for a king, especially one who had condemned her to death. But the feeling that she was somehow tied to his own predicament, to Fenris, was a relentless, nagging presence in his thoughts. It was a counterintuitive thought, a betrayal of everything he had been taught to believe about strength and royal lineage. Yet he couldn't shake it. The lack of any definitive answers, combined with his rapidly declining physical state, plunged him into a deeper despair. He felt the weight of his crown, a crushing burden that threatened to suffocate him. He saw the worried glances of his closest advisors, sensed the whispers among the court about his declining judgment, his erratic temper. Lady Seraphina's growing influence, her confident, calculating presence, was a constant, irritating buzz in the periphery of his awareness. He felt the throne, the very stability of his kingdom, slipping through his fingers like sand. He was losing his grip, and with it, his kingdom. The very thought made his stomach clench with a cold fear. He was failing his people, failing Fenris, failing himself. A profound sense of loneliness settled over him, heavier than any cloak. He was the Alpha King, yet he felt utterly alone, isolated by his burden and his secret torment. He yearned for the primal connection he once shared with his wolf, a bond that had made him whole, invincible. Now he was fractured, diminished. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against the cold stone of the window frame. A wave of dizziness washed over him, his vision blurring at the edges. His limbs felt heavy, unresponsive, as if rooted to the floor. The strength that had sustained him for so long, through countless battles and political storms, was finally giving way. He tried to push through it, to steady himself, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled unexpectedly, sending a jolt of pain through his frame. He stumbled, grasping blindly at the nearby heavy oak desk, but his fingers slipped. He felt himself falling, a rapid descent into darkness. He landed heavily on the plush rug, the air knocked from his lungs in a sharp gasp. His head hit the floor with a dull thud, sending sparks across his vision. The world swam around him, a dizzying kaleidoscope of pain and sorrow. He lay there helpless, his chest heaving, his body racked with an intense wave of weakness he had never experienced before. A tear, hot and unexpected, tracked a path down his temple. In that moment of utter vulnerability, stripped bare of his strength and his regal facade, one name surfaced from the deepest, most primal part of his being. He whispered it, a desperate, longing plea to the lost part of his soul. Fenris. The whisper of Fenris on King Alaric's lips had been a dying man's plea, a desperate gasp for a soul he no longer possessed. He lay on the cold flagstones of his private chamber, breath rattling in his chest, the royal wolf amulet on his neck, a dull, lifeless weight against his skin. This weakness, this gnawing emptiness, had become a constant companion, a shadowed threat to his very reign. It had stripped him of sleep, of focus, of the primal strength that defined an Alpha King. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that he was losing himself, and with him, his kingdom. The mystery of the shadowless maid Ilara twisted in his mind like a persistent, thorny vine. He had dismissed her as a mere servant, a curiosity, then a threat. Yet her image kept returning, intertwined with fragmented glimpses of his lost wolf. He saw the faint, shimmering paw print in his thoughts, heard the echoing, silent howl from the dungeon depths. A cold, hard truth began to settle in his bones. Alara held a piece of his answer, a fragment of his very being. Alaric pushed himself up, every muscle protesting, his vision momentarily blurring at the edges. He needed answers, and he needed them now, before he became nothing more than a ghost in his own palace. He would not allow the court's fear or Seraphina's manipulations to dictate his destiny. His life, his power, his very soul now hinged on a 19-year-old maid condemned to soulless. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble, the weariness etched deep into his features. The whispers of the court, the murmurs of his counsel, they would condemn his actions. Let them. His kingdom was collapsing from within, and he would seize any chance, however improbable, to save it. His voice, though hoarse, carried an unshakable resolve when he summoned his most trusted guards. "Bring the maid Alara from the dungeons," he commanded, his gray eyes burning with an unsettling fire. "Prepare the grand hall. The court will reconvene at midday. There are new circumstances concerning her case." He offered no further explanation, no justification, allowing the cryptic command to hang heavy in the air, stirring a fresh wave of confused speculation among his inner circle. The royal palace of Lyra buzzed with a low, nervous energy as the midday sun began its descent. Whispers slithered through the high, vaulted halls, ricocheting off the ancient stone carvings of wolves, each one carrying a fragment of the king's unexpected decree. Why a retrial? What new evidence could possibly overturn a verdict already sealed by fear and tradition? Courtiers gathered in hushed groups, their silks rustling, their eyes darting toward the throne where Alaric would soon sit. Lady Seraphina stood at the edge of one such group, her perfect smile strained, her blue eyes narrowed just perceptibly. She had worked tirelessly to secure Alara's execution, to remove this inexplicable obstacle to her rise. This sudden reversal was a thorn in her carefully laid plans, an affront to her influence. She smoothed the rich fabric of her gown, her inner thoughts a tempest of calculation and cold fury. The heavy oak doors of the grand hall groaned open, and Alara stepped inside, flanked by two imposing guards. Her slender form, still bearing the faint marks of her dungeon confinement, seemed impossibly fragile against the grandeur of the chamber. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered nobility, followed by a torrent of renewed murmurs. Alara's eyes, emerald and wide, swept across the familiar faces, the judgmental stares, the glittering finery that felt so far removed from the damp silence of her cell. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach, a resurgence of the terror that had consumed her during the first trial. Yet beneath the fear, a strange sense of resilience had taken root. The chilling touch, the phantom paw print, the echoes of a powerful, grieving presence in the dungeon, they had changed her. She was no longer just a frightened maid. She was something more, something undefined and unsettling. King Alaric entered, his presence silencing the room instantly. He moved with a practiced authority, yet Alara, watching him from her place before the throne, saw the subtle tremor in his hand, the almost imperceptible sag of his shoulders. His gray eyes, usually so commanding, now held a deep, profound weariness, shadowed by an inner torment. He looked less like a king and more like a man teetering on the edge of a precipice. The air in the grand hall grew heavy, thick with unspoken questions and simmering tension. A dry, metallic taste filled Alara's mouth. She could feel the weight of every gaze, every judgment, pressing down upon her. She tried to focus on the intricate carvings on the throne, on anything but the king's face, anything but the gnawing fear that whispered of a swift, inevitable end. Alaric sat upon the throne, the royal wolf amulet on his chest catching the light, but offering no discernible glow. He looked out at the assembled court, his gaze finally settling on Alara. For a long moment, he simply observed her, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes. Doubt, curiosity, and a faint, desperate hope. "We are gathered here again," Alaric's voice, though firm, seemed to carry an underlying tremor, "because new circumstances have come to light regarding the accusations against Alara, the maid." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, his eyes scanning the faces of his council, searching for understanding, finding only veiled confusion. He saw Lady Seraphina's rigid posture, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. He ignored her, focusing his weakened will on the task at hand. The court previously condemned her, based on ancient superstitions and the absence of her shadow. Alaric continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, fueled by a deep, almost instinctual conviction. But shadows are not always what they seem, and absence does not always signify emptiness. A low murmur rippled through the court, a mix of disbelief and growing unease. What was the king implying? Was he questioning the very foundations of their beliefs? Alara felt a peculiar shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change in the air's texture, like static electricity before a storm. Her emerald eyes, drawn by an invisible force, strayed toward the space directly beside the king's throne. A breath of icy air, not from the open windows, brushed against the exposed skin of a few courtiers nearest the dais. A low, almost inaudible hum vibrated through the ancient stones beneath their feet. Alara felt a sudden, sharp surge of primal energy, a familiar yet terrifying pull that resonated deep within her core. It was the same presence she had felt in the dungeons, stronger now, more distinct. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but beneath the fear, a strange electric current pulsed, connecting her to something profound and ancient. She instinctively knew it was here. Then, for a fleeting, impossible moment, a shimmer, like heat rising from ancient stone, took on a vague canine form near the king's left foot. It was ethereal, translucent, yet undeniably there, a magnificent wolf, spectral and shimmering silver, its eyes glowing with an ancient, sorrowful light. Only a few in the vast hall glimpsed it, a fleeting phantom in their peripheral vision, a trick of the light perhaps, or a sudden, unexplained draft. One elderly noblewoman gasped, clutching her chest, her eyes wide with terror. A young guard standing close to the throne instinctively stepped back, his hand flying to the hilt of his sword, his face pale as marble. Ilara's breath hitched in her throat. She saw it clearly now, not a trick of light, but a magnificent, sorrowful beast, its shimmering form almost solidifying before her eyes. The wolf was real, yet not real, a creature of pure spirit. A wave of profound familiarity washed over her, a connection so deep it felt like a part of her own being had finally found its echo. But with that recognition came an overwhelming sense of pain, a deep, aching sorrow that was not entirely her own. She felt its longing, its confusion, its immense, devastating loss. Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden, blurring her vision for a moment. This was Fenris, the king's lost wolf, the very essence of his power and soul, and it was broken. King Alaric too felt the sudden drop in temperature, the prickle on his skin. His gaze, still fixed on Alara, shifted slightly, drawn by the sudden, palpable shift in the air, the collective intake of breath from those nearest the throne. He turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the space beside him. He saw a faint disturbance in the air, a shimmering distortion, like heat haze above a summer road. It was fleeting, a mere ghost of an image, but it was enough. His heart clenched, a desperate hope blooming amidst the despair. Could it be? Could his Fenris truly be here? His gray eyes, usually so sharp, now held a bewildered, almost pleading question. Lady Seraphina, though she saw no wolf, felt the palpable shift in the room, the sudden fear that rippled through the court. She watched the king, then Alara, her perfect features tightening with suspicion. Something was happening, something beyond her control, something linked to that infuriating maid. She cursed inwardly, her ambition burning bright. This charade, whatever it was, threatened everything she had meticulously built. She saw Alara's tears, the maid's rapt gaze fixed on the empty air beside the throne, and a cold dread began to coil in her stomach. The spectral wolf, its form briefly more defined, radiated a silent, profound sorrow that filled the vast hall, touching the hearts of those who perceived it. Its magnificent head was bowed slightly, its shimmering silver fur seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Its eyes, ancient and luminous, conveyed an unfathomable grief, a deep yearning for something lost. Alara felt a whisper of a memory, not her own, but one of vast, open plains and cold moonlit nights, a sense of boundless freedom now replaced by an unbearable confinement. It was a fragment of the wolf's soul touching hers. She reached out a trembling hand, a subconscious gesture of comfort, of recognition. Just as Alara's fingers extended, brushing against nothing but air, the shimmering silver wolf flickered. Its form, which had seemed so close to solid, began to dissipate, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The light in its eyes dimmed, its outline softened, becoming less distinct. The chilling presence in the air retreated, leaving behind only the lingering scent of damp earth and something wild, indefinable. It was gone as quickly as it had arrived, leaving no trace, no shadow, no physical evidence of its magnificent, sorrowful existence. The grand hall fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The sudden coldness receded, replaced by the normal, slightly stuffy warmth of the crowded chamber. Those who had glimpsed the spectral wolf exchanged wide-eyed, terrified glances, questioning their own sanity. Those who had seen nothing but the strange reactions of others merely felt a palpable sense of the unknown, a chilling mystery hanging heavy in the air. King Alaric remained on his throne, his body still and rigid, his gray eyes fixed on the empty space beside him, bewildered and desperate. He stared, unblinking, at the spot where his heart had almost recognized a long-lost friend, a piece of himself that had briefly returned, only to vanish once more. The air in the grand hall still hummed with the shock of Fenris's fleeting appearance. Every breath caught in the throats of the assembled courtiers, their eyes darting between King Alaric, who stood as if carved from stone, and Alara, the maid accused of crimes beyond comprehension. Alara felt the collective weight of their gazes, a thousand invisible threads of suspicion and fear pulling at her. She stood before the gilded throne, her hands clasped tightly, the coldness of the stone floor seeping through her worn slippers. Her emerald eyes, usually downcast, now held a defiant, searching quality, trying to make sense of the strange energy that had just pulsed through the room. King Alaric's gray eyes, however, were fixed solely on Alara. His jaw was tight, a muscle twitching beneath his skin as he struggled to reconcile the spectral vision with the maid standing before him. He had seen it, everyone had seen it, the shimmering form of his lost wolf, a phantom of his own soul, and it had appeared near her. An unsettling whisper of a thought, a dangerous truth, began to form in the deepest recesses of his mind. He watched Alara, searching for any tell, any sign that could explain this impossible occurrence, his heart thrumming with a rhythm he could not identify. It was not fear, not entirely, it was something else, something primal and ancient that stirred within his bones. A sudden, almost imperceptible shift occurred at Alara's feet. The polished dark stone, which had always reflected nothing where her shadow should have been, now seemed to ripple. A gasp caught in Alara's throat. A faint haze, like the shimmer of heat rising from hot sand, began to coalesce. It was not dark, not a true shadow of black, but rather a soft, ethereal outline, a ghost of what should have been there all along. It pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light, a silver-blue luminescence that seemed to drink the torchlight rather than merely reflect it. Alara's breath hitched. She looked down, her heart hammering against her ribs, a mix of terror and profound wonder blooming inside her. The thing at her feet was distinct, a faint echo of her own form, but it was not solid, not real. It was a projection, a living whisper of light. The court stirred, a collective murmur rising, but no one dared move. Lady Seraphina, positioned perfectly to observe every nuance of the drama, clenched her fists. Her sharp blue eyes narrowed, suspicion turning to a chilling realization as she watched the strange light grow stronger at Alara's feet. This was not the dark magic she had hoped to expose. This was something far older, far more dangerous to her ambitions. She felt a cold dread begin to coil in her stomach, threatening to unravel all her careful machinations. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine and old stone, now overlaid with an electric tang that prickled Alara's skin. From the shadowed alcove near the throne, where the king's advisors usually stood, Fenris emerged once more. This time its form was more defined, less fleeting, a magnificent silver-gray wolf woven from moonlight and ancient mist. Its eyes, twin pools of an ancient, knowing light, were no longer searching the empty spaces of the room. They were fixed, unwavering, on the shimmering outline beneath Alara's feet. A low growl, more vibration than sound, emanated from the spectral beast, a sound that seemed to pass through the courtiers, resonating only within Alara and King Alaric. Alara felt it deep in her chest, a mournful chord that tugged at her very being. King Alaric felt it too. The growl was not of anger but of recognition, of an agonizing, raw ache. It was Fenris, truly Fenris, and it was alive, more alive than it had been in years. His gaze snapped from Alara's feet to his wolf, then back again, the truth unfolding before him with breathtaking speed. The spectral shadow, the lost wolf, Alara's very existence, they were all intertwined. His mind raced, grappling with the impossible, the sheer audacity of this connection that defied all reason and understanding. He could taste the metallic tang of fear and wonder on his tongue. Fenris took a hesitant step forward, its spectral paws making no sound on the stone. But Alara felt the tremor in the air. The ethereal shadow at her feet pulsed brighter, as if calling to the wolf, a silent beacon in the hushed hall. It seemed to stretch, to reach out, a tender, shimmering extension of her form, yet completely separate. Alara felt a deep, profound sorrow well up inside her, a feeling that was not entirely her own, but seemed to flow from the spectral wolf before her, through the mysterious shadow, and into her heart. She wanted to reach out, to touch it, to offer solace, but her hands remained locked, trembling slightly. The king's lost wolf, now fully visible to all, its form shimmering with agitation, let out a soundless howl. It was a powerful, guttural cry that echoed not in the ears of the court, but directly in the souls of Alara and King Alaric. Alara felt a sharp, agonizing pang in her chest, a sensation of ancient loss and desperate longing that mirrored her own quiet despair. Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked at the corners of her emerald eyes. She knew with an instinct far older than her 19 years that this howl was a lament, a heartbroken plea from a spirit that had been adrift for too long. King Alaric's own chest tightened. The silent howl ripped through him, tearing at the carefully constructed walls around his heart. It was the howl he had heard in his dreams, the one he had tried to silence with stoicism and duty. It was Fenris, crying out for something it had lost, something he had lost. And now, impossibly, it was drawn to the maid. His breath caught, a cold knot forming in his throat. He watched his wolf, his other half, his very spirit, with a desperate, burgeoning hope. This was not the soulless creature he had been told Alara was. This was something sacred, something connected to the deepest mysteries of his own being. Fenris began to move, no longer hesitant. It circled Alara once, its shimmering form brushing past her, and Alara felt a wave of profound sadness wash over her, a ghostly touch that made her skin tingle. The ethereal shadow at her feet swirled, almost playfully, dancing with the spectral wolf. It was as if two long-separated halves were finally, impossibly, reuniting. The court watched, frozen in place, utterly bewildered, their earlier fear now mixed with an awe they did not understand. Many covered their mouths, their eyes wide with disbelief, unable to utter a sound. The wolf then turned, its eyes still locked on the shimmering shadow that followed Alara's every subtle shift. It darted, a blur of silver mist, toward the massive carved throne. The shadow, an extension of Alara's connection, stretched and thinned, pulling away from her feet, a luminous thread guiding the spectral beast. It hovered briefly at the base of the throne, a silent, ethereal beacon. Alara felt a profound sense of emptiness as the shadow began to move away from her. A part of her soul seemingly pulled along with it. Fenris followed the shimmering shadow, its ghostly form melting into the dark, polished stone beneath the throne. It was not a crack, not an obvious opening, but a barely visible crevice, a hairline fissure that seemed to appear only for this moment. The spectral wolf flowed into it, like water into dry earth, its silver form shrinking, then disappearing completely from sight. The last thing Alara saw was the faint light of the shadow, a final poignant shimmer, as it too vanished into the unseen depths, leaving a profound void in its wake. The court stood in stunned silence, a collective gasp echoing through the hall. King Alaric remained rooted to the spot, his mouth slightly agape, his gray eyes wide with a shock that stole his breath and froze his very soul. The air itself seemed to shatter. A collective gasp ripped through the royal palace courtroom, followed by a cacophony of terrified shouts and the frantic scraping of chairs. Courtiers, bedecked in their finest silks and jewels, recoiled from the throne, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and utter disbelief. The spectral wolf, Fenris, the king's lost spirit, had simply vanished, swallowed by a fissure in the ancient stone beneath the very seat of power. Its disappearance left behind not just an empty space, but a gaping void of comprehension in the minds of all who witnessed it. Alara stood rooted to the spot, her breath caught in her throat. The echoes of Fenris's silent howl still vibrated through her bones, a mournful resonance that felt deeply personal. Where the mysterious shadow had danced around her feet moments before, there now lingered a ghost of warmth, a fleeting sensation like the memory of a true shadow. She looked down, expecting to see it, to find some tangible proof of its existence, but the marble floor was bare. Only a subtle shimmer, almost imperceptible, remained where her shadow should have been, a constant, unsettling distortion in the light. This new reality, this profound connection to something both powerful and ancient, was dawning upon her with terrifying clarity. It was a burden she never asked for, a destiny she could not comprehend. Her fingers twitched, a nervous tremor running through her slender frame. She felt an unsettling emptiness, a deep ache in her chest, as if a part of herself had been torn away when Fenris vanished. King Alaric stood frozen, his eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on the narrow crevice. The bustling chaos of the court faded into a distant hum in his ears, overshadowed by the roaring revelation within his own mind. The truth, long obscured by superstition, fear, and his own stubborn pride, crashed down upon him like a tidal wave. Alara, the maid he had condemned as soulless, the girl he nearly sent to her death, was not cursed. She was the vessel. His wolf, his mighty Fenris, a living piece of his very soul, had been tethered to her all along. Every pang of weakness, every lost vision, every dimming of his royal wolf amulet suddenly made a terrible, undeniable sense. He had been so blind, so caught in his own anguish, that he had failed to see the miraculous bond forming right before his eyes. A wave of profound guilt washed over him, chilling him to the core. He had almost destroyed the very key to his own salvation, to the heart of his kingdom. Lady Seraphina, however, saw none of this profound understanding. Her face, usually a mask of serene beauty, was now contorted in a horrifying grimace of fury and disbelief. Her sharp blue eyes darted from the empty crevice to the bewildered king, then settled with venomous contempt on Alara. All her meticulously woven schemes, her endless manipulations, her carefully cultivated image of power and influence, had been irrevocably thwarted by a ghost and a shadowless girl. The throne, which she believed was almost within her grasp, now seemed further away than ever, shrouded in an unpredictable, dangerous mystery. A bitter taste filled her mouth, the acrid flavor of utter failure. Her fists clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms, a desperate desire to lash out, to reclaim control burning through her veins. This was not how her ascension was meant to unfold. This chaos was an affront to her very existence. The court guards, usually so disciplined, stood in disarray, their spears held loosely, their faces reflecting the general panic. Whispers grew louder, blending into a frantic buzz of speculation and terror. Some pointed at Alara, still believing her to be a dark witch, the source of this unnatural phenomenon. Others muttered about ancient prophecies, about the king's diminishing power, about the very foundations of the wolf kingdom trembling. The air grew thick with fear, tasting metallic and cold on Alara's tongue. She could feel every gaze upon her, the weight of their fear pressing down, heavy and suffocating. Her skin prickled, a nervous energy thrumming just beneath the surface. She yearned for the quiet solitude of the dungeons, for the familiar chill of the stone walls, anything but this blinding, overwhelming spotlight. Alaric, however, slowly began to stir from his stupor. The initial shock gave way to a cold, desperate clarity. He could feel the phantom ache in his chest, the dull throb where Fenris's presence once resided. His power, already weakened, now felt utterly fragmented, hollow. But with that emptiness came a startling realization. Alara was not the problem. She was the answer. His wolf, his very soul, had chosen her, had led him to this precipice of understanding. He had judged her, condemned her, sought to destroy her, when all along she held the key to his very existence. A deep, agonizing groan rumbled in his throat, a sound of profound remorse that no one else seemed to hear amidst the rising din. He lifted his head, his gaze sweeping across the chaotic assembly. The flickering torchlight caught the steely glint in his gray eyes, eyes that had seen battlefields and held counsel with the wisest of his kingdom. His initial expression of shock had hardened into something unyielding, a fierce resolve born of absolute desperation. He could not allow this to spiral further into madness. He could not allow his kingdom to fall into ruin simply because he had been too arrogant, too afraid to see the truth. The court needed a leader, and he was still their king, even if his wolf had abandoned him to a crevice beneath his throne. "Silence!" Alaric's voice, though strained, cut through the din like a sharpened blade, echoing through the high vaulted hall. It was a command that carried the weight of generations, a primal roar that resonated with the ancient magic of the Alpha line. The clamor died down almost instantly, replaced by a tense, breathless quiet. Every head turned towards him, every eye fixed on the imposing figure of their king. The fear was still palpable, but now it was laced with a wary obedience, a desperate hope that he could somehow restore order to this unsettling mystery. Alara felt her own breath hitch, her emerald eyes locking with Alaric's. There was no longer anger in his gaze, nor the cold judgment that had plagued her since her accusation. Instead, she saw a raw, unvarnished fear, a profound regret, and something else she could not quite name, a plea. It was a silent conversation between two souls suddenly bound by an unforeseen, terrifying destiny. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the court. She felt an intense heat radiating from his eyes, a desperate urgency that transcended their current positions, the king and the maid. Alaric took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of fear and old stone filling his lungs. He felt the dim, cold weight of his royal wolf amulet against his chest, a constant reminder of his loss. But now it also served as a symbol of the connection he had so foolishly ignored. He needed Fenris, he needed his wolf, and he knew with an absolute terrifying certainty that Alara was integral to its retrieval. This was not a choice, it was a desperate, primal necessity. His personal judgment, his pride, his very future, all depended on this singular, unlikely maid. "The court is in turmoil," Alaric began, his voice firmer now, each word ringing with authority. He swept his gaze across the face of his stunned courtiers, daring anyone to challenge him. "What you have witnessed today that is not the work of dark magic, nor is it a sign of weakness in this kingdom." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, to challenge the superstitious terror that had gripped them. "It is a mystery, yes, but one that concerns the very heart of my rule, the very essence of my being." His confession hung heavy in the air, a startling admission from a proud alpha king. He turned his full attention back to Alara, his gray eyes piercing her with an intensity that made her shiver despite the lingering warmth in the courtroom. "This maid, Alara," he continued, his voice resonating with a newfound conviction, "stands accused of being soulless. But I tell you now with the weight of my crown and the truth of my own fading spirit that she is not soulless." His words were a direct refutation of every accusation, every whispered fear, every decree previously issued. The court stirred again, a ripple of confused murmurs passing through the ranks. What was the king saying? Was he mad with grief? Alaric held up a hand, silencing them once more. He would tolerate no dissent, not now, not when so much was at stake. "My wolf, Fenris, a part of my very soul, has been lost to me for too long." He spoke the words with raw honesty, a vulnerability few had ever witnessed from their stoic king. "It vanished into the crevice beneath my throne, following a connection, a resonance that only Alara seemed to possess." He gestured vaguely towards Alara's feet, then to the empty crevice, drawing the undeniable connection for all to see. The pieces of the puzzle, for him, had clicked into place with a horrifying yet illuminating certainty. Alara felt her breath catch, her mind racing. He understood. He truly understood. The weight of the accusation, the fear of the pyre, had momentarily faded, replaced by the crushing responsibility of his words. She was not soulless. She was linked. The strange emptiness she felt when Fenris disappeared was not a figment of her imagination. It was real. It was a bond, a shared existence that defied all logic, all reason. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, unbidden, a mixture of profound relief and an overwhelming terror of the unknown. Lady Seraphina's jaw tightened, her hands clenching even harder. This was insufferable. The king was making a fool of himself, unraveling his own authority for a mere servant girl. Her mind raced, searching for an angle, a way to twist this newfound madness to her advantage. But the king's conviction, his raw honesty, made it impossible to dismiss as a simple fit of delirium. The court, though confused, was listening, captivated by the gravity of his confession. He was not just speaking, he was declaring a new truth, one that would redefine their understanding of power, of their king, and of this shadowless maid. "Therefore," Alaric declared, his voice rising, imbued with a desperate, unshakable conviction, "Alara will not be executed." The words hung in the air, a shocking reprieve that sent another wave of gasps through the court. Many had already resigned themselves to her demise, convinced she was a witch deserving of death. Now, their king was not only sparing her, but elevating her to a position of unholy importance. This was a direct challenge to tradition, to their understanding of justice. "She will not be executed," he repeated, his eyes burning into Alara's, a silent plea passing between them. "Instead, she will be instrumental." He paused, allowing the weight of that word to settle. "She will be instrumental in retrieving my lost wolf, my Fenris. She will help me reclaim the very soul of this kingdom." The implications of his declaration were staggering, laying bare the profound vulnerability of their king and the unexpected pivotal role of the shadowless maid. The silence that followed was absolute, filled with the collective breath held by every person in the hall, awaiting the next impossible command. The king's declaration silenced the great hall. Courtiers who had demanded Alara's execution now exchanged stunned glances, their whispers dying. Alara stood motionless, the phantom shadow still shimmering at her feet, a silent testament to the impossible. A strange tingling spread through her, a warmth both alien and deeply familiar. King Alaric, his voice raw with resolve, turned his gray gaze to Alara. A vulnerable plea in his eyes caught her breath. He dismissed the court with a curt nod, sending shocked nobles scrambling from the hall. The air cleared as they departed, leaving only Alara and the king in the vast, echoing space. He walked down the dais steps, his regal robe sweeping the stone floor. Alara watched him approach, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The king's imposing stature held a new fragility, a subtle stoop to his shoulders. His heavy silver royal wolf amulet, usually gleaming, now seemed lifeless, contrasting the ethereal glow that had touched her feet. He stopped paces from her. The distance between them felt thin, permeable. "Come," he said, his voice a low whisper, stripped of its usual authority. "We will speak in private." Alara nodded, her throat tight. The king led her from the great hall through dim corridors, their footsteps soft on tapestries. The grand throne room gave way to narrower passages, the scent of pine growing stronger. He ushered her into a modest chamber, warmed by a crackling fire. Ancient books lined the walls. An oak table filled the center. The air, heavy with parchment and wood smoke, contrasted her emotional storm. Alaric closed the heavy door, the soft click echoing in the sudden quiet. He gestured to a plush chair, but Alara remained standing, her hands clasped tightly, her fingers locked. She knew letting go would reveal their tremble. The king walked to the roaring fire, his back to her. Alara watched the flames dance, their light reflecting on the table. "Alara," he began, his voice rough. He turned, his gray eyes, usually sharp, now clouded with torment. What we all saw was Fenris. He paused, taking a ragged breath. "Fenris is part of my soul, the essence of my power, my strength, my connection to this land and my people. For years he has been fading, a whisper then a distant echo. I thought it a curse, a punishment for some unknown failing." His gaze dropped, heavy with shame. "I have been a hollow king, Alara, ruling by a fading echo." Alara listened, her fear yielding to a profound, aching empathy. Lyra's powerful alpha stood stripped of defenses, confessing a weakness threatening his kingdom. His voice held desperation from years of silent suffering. She saw lines on his face, not from age but from relentless internal battle. His confession, terrifying, felt like an unexpected gift. "When Fenris vanished beneath the throne," Alaric whispered, "I felt it. A tearing, a severing. A part of me died." He looked up, unshed tears gleaming, a contrast to his usual stoic demeanor. "And then I saw him. Your shadow, Alara. Not a shadow at all, but Fenris, clinging to you, drawing power from you." Alara's breath hitched. Her shadow, the absence marking her an outcast, was now the vessel for the king's lost spirit. This truth, profound and unbelievable, shook her understanding. A chill ran down her spine, not entirely from fear, but from destiny, a purpose she had never sought, but which had found her. "I felt something," Alara managed, her voice soft. "In the dungeon, cold, then warmth. A paw print. It felt like longing." Alaric nodded, his gaze intent. "Yes, that was him. He has been seeking you, Alara, all this time, drawing on your unique nature. Your shadowlessness is not a curse. It is a conduit, a connection to my lost power." He walked closer, stopping an arm's length away. The fire's heat intensified, the air crackling, Alaric's despair almost palpable. "I condemned you, Alara," he admitted, his voice thick with self-reproach. "I allowed them to call you soulless while you held a piece of mine. My ancestors would spit on my name." His fists clenched. "I nearly sent you to your death. Forgive me." A wave of emotion washed over Alara. His raw apology touched a part of her long numb. Forgiveness for the fear, accusations, impending execution. It was too vast to process. Her eyes pricked. She had never imagined the king, the fearsome alpha, capable of such regret. His vulnerability melted her fear, replacing it with fierce protectiveness. "Nothing to forgive, your majesty," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You did not know. I did not know." Alaric looked at her, truly seeing past her maid's attire to her resilience, her quiet strength. Perhaps he saw a reflection of his lost self. A tremor ran through him. "I was lost," he said, his voice regaining power, though tinged with deep weariness. "Lost to grief, anger, emptiness. I feared for my kingdom. Seraphina merely preyed upon my weakness." His jaw tightened, a flash of anger in his eyes. "But now there is hope. A terrifying, fragile hope." He extended a hand, an unspoken plea. "Alara, I need you. My kingdom needs you. You are the key. You have been connected to Fenris all this time. You must help me bring him back." The enormity of his request, his trust, settled upon Alara. Her mind reeled. She, a shadowless maid, was asked to venture into darkness that had swallowed a king's soul. Fear, a cold knife, pierced her resolve. How could she face such a task? Then she recalled the spectral wolf, its yearning howl, the desperate glow at her feet. She remembered the phantom paw print, the inexplicable warmth in her heart. A deep, undeniable pull, like an invisible tether, tugged at her. It was Fenris, calling, a primal summons. She closed her eyes, firelight painting her eyelids orange. When she opened them, her emerald gaze met Alaric's. "I will help you, your majesty," Alara said, her voice trembling but solid. "I feel him too, a sadness, a longing." She placed a hand over her heart, where the pull resonated most strongly. "He calls to me." Profound relief washed over Alaric's white face, easing the tension in his shoulders. Alara saw it, a raw glimpse into the burdened man beneath the crown. He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes searching hers, trying to decipher her commitment. The air between them, once heavy with judgment, now held fragile, nascent trust, woven from shared vulnerability. "Thank you, Alara," he breathed, heavy with gratitude. "You cannot imagine what this means to me, to Fenris." He looked at his amulet, then her. "We must go now, the crevice beneath the throne. That is where we must follow." The thought of that dark abyss sent another shiver through Alara, but deep fear was tempered by determination. The path was fraught with peril, a journey into darkness. A strange calm settled within her, acceptance of a destiny she could not deny. Accused of being soulless, she now understood her profound connection to the very heart of the Wolf King's spirit. Alaric moved to a concealed panel, pulling aside a tapestry. He retrieved a single heavy torch, its head dark. He struck flint, and a flame erupted, casting dancing shadows across the room. The light, though small, felt like a beacon in the vast unknown. He turned to Alara, flickering torchlight illuminating stern resolve on his face. The king was no longer merely a burdened monarch. He was desperate, ready to face danger to reclaim himself. Alara met his gaze, a silent promise passing between them. Their path intertwined, their destinies linked by the spectral wolf residing within her shadow. Together, without another word, King Alaric and Alara walked from the chamber, the torch held high, illuminating their way. Its light flickered against cold stone walls as they returned to the great hall, toward the dais, towards the shadowed crevice beneath the throne. They stood before the barely visible fissure in the ancient stone, preparing to descend. The lone torch cast long, dancing shadows, beckoning them into darkness, into the heart of the mystery. King Alaric gripped his flickering torch, casting dancing shadows into the crevice. A damp, ancient chill seeped into Alara's bones, colder than any dungeon. Sir Gareth, his broad shoulders filling the narrow opening, followed, his hand on his sword hilt. The air grew heavy with wet stone and a primal scent that tugged Alara's awareness. Every breath felt like swallowing cold dust. Alaric moved with grim determination, scanning the rough walls. Alara felt a different sight awaken, a deep hum in her chest. She sensed the labyrinth before them, a twisted path of lost echoes. Her faint shimmer, usually her shadow, pulsed now, a gentle light visible only to her. "The air here is old, Elkind," Alaric observed, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Older than the palace above." He raised the torch, illuminating ancient carvings of stylized wolves twisting into impossible shapes. He felt the weight of centuries, a heavy cloak of history and sorrow. Alara reached out a hand, almost touching a swirling pattern like rippling water. "It calls to me," she whispered. An image flashed, a vast cavern, a lone silver wolf pacing. The vision was fleeting, yet real. She felt a profound pull, a yearning not entirely her own. This was Fenris, the king's lost spirit calling from the depths. Sir Gareth, ever watchful, pointed his torch left. "The path splits here, your majesty." Alaric hesitated, gazing at the two dark openings. He felt no inclination towards either. His internal compass, once unerring, remained dulled, a reminder of his fragmented soul. He looked at Alara, a silent question in his eyes. Alara closed her eyes, letting the tunnel's unseen current wash over her. To the left, she sensed a cold void, a deceptive dead end. To the right, a faint warmth, a distant thrumming, like a heart beating far away. "Right," she said, clear and sure. "He is to the right." Alaric nodded, wonder flickering in his stern expression. He had seen her shimmering outline lean toward that passage. A subtle shift. He moved, trusting her instinct, though unease tightened in his gut. Relying on a simple maid, on her inexplicable connection, was a humbling, frightening experience for a king. The passage narrowed, forcing single file. The air grew colder, heavier. Alara led, her senses attuned to stone whispers, to Fenris's faint echoes. She saw torchlight distortions, shadows stretching too long, or dancing without an object. These were illusions, guardians of the lost spirit she'd understood. One distortion solidified, a wall of shimmering darkness in their path. It pulsed with a faint, hypnotic glow, reflecting their fear. Alaric reached for his sword hilt, but Alara laid a hand on his arm. "It is not real," she murmured, her gaze fixed. She felt its intent, an empty promise of despair. "What do you mean, not real, Sapas?" Alaric asked, his voice strained. He saw jagged rocks and chasms behind the shimmering wall, a barrier to break the spirit. He felt the illusion pressing, whispering doubts of success, of his own worth. Alara stepped forward, ignoring Alaric's gasp. The illusion rippled, distorting her form, but she felt no resistance, only permeability. She passed through it like smoke, reappearing. "It is only a trick of the mind," she explained, turning back. "A test for those who lack resolve." Alaric stared, then, with a deep breath, followed. The moment he stepped through, the cold fear vanished, replaced by renewed determination. Sir Gareth followed without hesitation, his face impassive. This maid, once accused of being soulless, now navigated a realm of pure spirit with ease. Deeper they went, the tunnels twisting, becoming more elaborate, more ancient. They passed a chamber humming with sorrow, and Alaric felt a sharp pang, an ache of loneliness. It was Fenris's pain, he realized, echoing through the stone. Alara paused, hand pressed against a cold wall. She saw a young wolf tearing through a sunlit forest, then a flash of blinding light in terrible silence. The king's loss. Her eyes welled, a shared grief transcending their separate lives. "He struggled," Alara whispered, her voice choked. "He fought against the darkness." Alaric's hand found hers, a silent offer of comfort, a desperate plea for understanding. He felt her cold skin, the tremor in her fingers, and a protective urge rose. He had never imagined such vulnerability or strength in a servant. The tunnels became a maze of flickering images, designed to ensnare their minds. They saw loved ones beckoning down false paths. Alaric saw his father calling him back to the throne, away from this foolish quest. He saw his kingdom crumbling, believing he had abandoned duties for a maid and a ghost. He felt the pull of responsibility, the crown's crushing weight, threatening to overwhelm his purpose. Alara saw her reflection, distorted and monstrous, a creature with no shadow, no soul, confirming old accusations. She saw herself alone, unloved, forever an outcast. The images clawed, trying to drag her into self-doubt. Her vision blurred with tears, her heart aching with searing pain. Do not look at them, Alaric commanded, his voice sharp, cutting through the whispers. He gripped Alara's hand tighter. They are lies. Focus on what is real. He looked away from his crumbling kingdom's spectral image, forcing his mind back to his quest's purpose. His eyes met Alara's, a desperate connection forged in shared peril. Alara nodded, tears stinging her eyes, resolve hardening her features. She focused on the faint, persistent thrumming, the distant heartbeat drawing them deeper. She squeezed Alaric's hand, drawing strength from his presence, offering fragile courage. They were bound now by more than the quietness. They were bound by trust, by a shared vulnerability stripping away titles. As they pressed on, illusions faded, replaced by twisting passages designed to disorient, to make them lose hope. Sir Gareth, his face a mask of stone, marked their path with chalk, a practical anchor. He moved with a seasoned warrior's quiet efficiency, senses alert for danger, his loyalty an unwavering shield. We are close, Alara breathed, her eyes shining with inner light. The thrumming was stronger, a desperate, insistent rhythm. She felt Fenris, not as a vision, but as a direct emotional presence, deep sorrow mixed with fierce longing for reunion. Her missing shadow, once a fear, now felt like a conduit to the lost wolf's essence. The path widened, rough stone giving way to polished surfaces gleaming faintly in the torchlight. The air grew warmer, humid, carrying a faint metallic tang. They emerged into a vast cavern, immense like a world. The walls shimmered with strange, iridescent crystals, casting an ethereal, ghostly glow mixing with the torchlight. In the chamber's center, bathed in strange light, was Fenris. The king's wolf spirit was magnificent, even weakened, its form, spectral, shimmering silver and gray, paced within an enclosure of pure, undulating energy. Not a barred cage, but an ethereal prison pulsed with deep blue light, holding the great wolf captive. Fenris let out a silent howl, a sound tearing at Alaric's soul, a cry of anguish and desperate hope. Alaric gasped, the torch almost slipping. Fenris, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, raw with years of suppressed guilt and longing. He stepped forward, his heart pounding. He felt his wolf's power, diminished but immense, resonating, calling to his soul's fragmented pieces. He saw sorrow in Fenris's luminous eyes, exhaustion in its form, and a fierce, protective rage ignited. Alara felt a surge of emotion from Alaric and Fenris, a wave of profound connection. She saw the ethereal cage, humming with dark magic, draining the wolf's strength. She understood. This was not a physical prison, but a magical one, designed to slowly extinguish the alpha spirit. Her heart clenched with fierce resolve. She would not let this happen. As Alaric took another step, hand outstretched, a cold, silken voice cut through the air. How utterly touching, Your Majesty. From the cavern's deepest shadows, where iridescent crystals gave way to darkness, Lady Seraphina emerged. Her golden hair was slightly disheveled, a few strands escaping her braid. Her blue eyes, usually sharp, now gleamed with chilling, venomous triumph. She held a small, dark amulet, its surface pulsing with a malevolent, faint red light. A cruel smile stretched across her lips, revealing teeth that seemed a little too sharp. She had followed them, unseen, her true intentions laid bare in this shimmering, ancient space. She was ready for a final, desperate confrontation. The blue-lit chamber held Fenris, a spectral sorrow trapped within invisible bonds. A shadow emerged from the dark, Lady Seraphina stepping into light. Her golden hair contrasted the grim stone, a cruel smile on her lips. Foolish king, she purred, triumph in her voice. You could not hide this power. Her predatory eyes fixed on the struggling wolf. This spirit was always mine. It will make me queen. Alaric reached for his sword, but moved slowly, still weak. A chill warned of defeat. Alara saw despair in his gray eyes, a vulnerability tearing at her. Fenris's pain was her own, echoing in her bones. The wolf, part of them both, suffered. Seraphina raised her hands. Violet energy gathered. It crackled, pulling light from Fenris. The wolf whimpered, its body shrinking. Alaric roared, lunging, but dark energy slammed him against the wall. He gasped, pain tearing his chest. Alara watched the king fall, the wolf fading. A fierce protectiveness ignited. She recalled the phantom paw print, an unseen presence. She was connected to Fenris, to the king's lost soul. Her missing shadow was a conduit. She stepped toward the cage, ignoring Seraphina's mocking gaze. "You will not take him," Alara whispered, steady. A burning warmth spread through her. This was the energy from the dungeons, the force that shattered the poison cup. This was Fenris. Seraphina laughed, a harsh sound. "What will you do, little maid? You will wither." She aimed a violet beam at Fenris. The wolf cried out, a soundless scream in Alara's mind, tearing her spirit. Its eyes dimmed, its form trembled. No, Alara's voice grew strong. She reached for Alaric, struggling in agony. She understood what was needed. Her life force, intertwined with Fenris, had to become the bridge. It was the only way. A faint shimmer radiated from her hand, a pure light pulsing with life. She focused all her will, pouring her connection between Alaric and the fading wolf. It felt like tearing herself. A searing pain. Her vision blurred, but she did not falter. A luminous silver thread came from her hand. It bypassed Seraphina's magic, weaving to Alaric, then Fenris. It was a spirit bridge, humming with Alara's sacrifice. Alaric felt a jolt of warm energy, pushing back despair. He saw Alara, pale, her eyes burning. Fenris sighed. Seraphina's violet magic recoiled, hissed, and shattered. Seraphina screamed, fury in her eyes. "Impossible! You are just a maid!" Alara was a living link. Alaric's warmth intensified, the silver thread pulling Fenris's essence through her. He felt primal power stir, a dormant beast waking. Energy hummed, weakness vanished. His gray eyes, once despairing, now burned. With a roar, Alaric surged to his feet. The royal wolf amulet blazed with inner fire. He was the Alpha, restored. The silver thread, Alara's spirit, solidified his connection, pouring ancient strength into him. Seraphina, stunned, lashed out with dark magic, purple bolts arcing. Alaric was faster, stronger. He moved with grace, meeting her attack with raw alpha power. A wave of force shattered her spells into glittering dust. He advanced, eyes locked on her. "You sought to steal what you could not understand," Alaric boomed. "You touched what was not yours." His hand, crackling with silver energy, shot out. The force of his will, channeled through the spirit link, slammed Seraphina. She shrieked in terror, flung backward. She crashed against the wall, then slid unconscious to the floor. The chamber fell silent, save for Alaric's breathing and Alara's soft light. The silver thread pulsed brilliantly. Fenris surged, flowing like liquid moonlight into Alaric. A profound shudder shook the king. He closed his eyes, a guttural sound of release escaping him. It was reunion, his soul whole. Power surged. Alara felt the connection sever gently. She swayed, strength drained, but peace settled. She had done it. As her energy ebbed, a faint shimmering distortion, more solid, shifted on the ground where the blue light met her feet. A shadow. Her own shadow. It was an ethereal outline, a promise of form. Alaric opened his eyes, glowing with wisdom, love, and gratitude. He saw Alara as the woman who saved his soul. He moved swiftly, catching her as her legs gave way, his touch gentle. "Alara," he whispered, emotion thick in his voice. He saw the faint presence at her feet, the ghost of a shadow. He understood. His wolf had been held within her. He scanned the chamber, noting the unconscious Seraphina in the empty cage. The battle was won, and he turned to Alara, cradling her face. "You saved me," he said, his voice raw. "You saved us all." Back in the royal palace, the court buzzed. King Alaric emerged from beneath the throne, Alara by his side. A gasp swept the hall. He stood tall, radiating undeniable power. The royal wolf amulet gleamed. Alara commanded silent awe. Her steps were steady. Her emerald eyes held wisdom. Behind her, a faint, shimmering shadow shifted in the torchlight. It was an ethereal presence, a testament to the spirit she had given. Alaric drew her forward, his hand on her back. His voice resonated with an alpha king's force, silencing whispers. "People of Lyra," he declared, sweeping his gaze across the court. "You judged Alara soulless. You condemned her." A murmur rippled. Seraphina was absent. "But you were gravely mistaken." His voice softened, looking at Alara, deep feeling in his eyes. Alara is not soulless. She is why I stand here today, whole. My lost wolf, my spirit, found refuge within her. He raised his voice. She is not a maid. She is the true savior of the wolf kingdom. From this day, Alara will be honored for her courage, sacrifice, and spirit. She will stand beside me as my trusted counsel. A hush fell, then applause began, growing to a roar. The king's declaration, his amulet's glow in Alara's shadow, dispelled doubt. The wolf kingdom felt renewed hope, a protective spirit flowing through its king. Alaric looked at Alara, a silent promise in his gaze, a future intertwined by courage, sacrifice, and newfound love.